operate on that matter, but we share information and we talk about the common event that we are covering. On the other hand, when they go back home, they never answer my emails. I try not to embarrass them by sending too much, but when I'm trying to get a certain perception, when I'm looking for an interviewee on the other side, I'm trying because I have these instincts, I really want to, and they don't cooperate on the other side. But when we meet in a third territory again, then we even drink coffee or, in their worst case, beer together.
That's interesting. That's an interesting interaction. David, have you found a similar situation?
Well, first of all, there's a couple of things. There's an advantage, which, because you're on television, they can't speak to you. They can speak to you off the record, not for the camera, but anything of value, if they're going to be out there, that you're going to see their face. Whereas people like me who write, you can go and speak to people, and nobody need ever know who it was exactly that I was speaking to, and they can sort of get their views across without exposing themselves. And therefore, sometimes you'll go to an international forum, and I've spoken to, never mind Iranian journalists, I've spoken to Iranian officials, and at Annapolis, where for sure, I was not going to get the Saudi Crown Prince or whoever it was who was there, I don't remember, to give me an on-the-record interview, but I did speak to one of the Saudi delegation members, and they knew that they could do that because they weren't immediately going to be seen around the world as speaking to the blooming Israelis. So there's a bit of an advantage there. The foreign press, the relations are very good here, although I've been very critical of a lot of foreign press coverage of Israel, to my great sorrow. But again, in the
Can you give us an example?
Yeah, the area that I was speaking about before in terms of context. I have some very good friends at the BBC. For example, I do a lot of interviews for the BBC. A colleague of mine at the BBC during Operation Cast Lead said something to Channel 2, actually, who I think followed that colleague for a day, about, well, the numbers speak for themselves in Cast Lead. 1,300 dead Israelis, 1,300 dead Palestinians, only 13 dead Israelis, as though if there'd only been hundreds of Israelis dead, you'd have got such good press coverage. And of course the numbers didn't speak for themselves in Cast Lead. Many, many Palestinians died because their leadership put ordinary Palestinians in harm's way. Hamas fought out of uniform and therefore gave the sense that many more non-combatants were being killed. Israel tries to protect its civilians. We have alarm systems and bomb shelters, and therefore a sentence like the numbers speak for themselves, it's puerile, it's asinine, it's so moronic that it is a discredit to any journalist who could utter it. And yet this was uttered by a very credible journalist. And I've had, run-ins along those lines. And one last thing I just want to say about what you were saying, Marcus, you talk about, the Arab television networks and use of new media and old media. Again, coming back to official Israel. Israel has no answer to this. It's investing no money in this. We don't have any satellite television coming out of Israel at a state level. We have wonderful foreign language radio broadcasts from Kol Israel that are so ridiculously underfunded that they're all basically collapsing. And think about this in Israel as well. Al Jazeera Arabic and others are broadcast in Israel. Israel worries and moans about the increasing alienation of its own Arab population. Well, some of these networks are contributing not merely to Israel's incredibly problematic image internationally, but they're contributing to real problems with internal Jewish-Arab relations inside Israel.
Well, we have a question now from the web, Joy from London, who says, how can activists in the diaspora get real-time answers in Israel's defense as their biggest problem is 24/7 bombardment from their enemies? So, Marcus, I'd like to throw that question at you.
Okay, well, Joy, if I could just put our own flag up for a moment. The Israel Project's website is a good place to go to get information. And I'm sure the Jerusalem Post website is a fantastic place to go to get information. These are clearly two key places to go.
Also, one more person who really would like to talk to you, who has a question that I'm sure you're about to answer. Alex from New York, he says, do you think the personal relations with the Arab press can really even make a difference?
Okay. There is absolutely no question in my mind that personal relations with the Arab press can make a difference. We were in Cairo, Arad and I, other journalists, at the press centre after President Obama made his speech. And the Israel Project's team did 3 hours of interviews after that speech, putting forward Israel's position on that speech. Those relationships maintain. We're still in contact with those journalists and we give them information. We're SMSing Arab journalists every single day now about the proximity talks, about Israeli statements relating to the proximity talks, because that information they will not get any other way. And that information really needs to get out. We are twittering them about Israeli leaders' positions on the proximity talks, and it's making a difference. We see it in the coverage. Just last week, we took an Arab network to a place in the north where, because of Braverman's plan, Arab Israelis are now getting employment opportunities. That's going to be seen on air by millions of people in the Arab world fairly soon. So yes, it's about relationships. Yes, we can make inroads in the Arab world, but most importantly, we have to make inroads in the Arab world. We have to have that dialogue going. They're not getting that information from any other means.
Okay, you talk about personal relations with the Arab press. Arad, what about not on the PR level, more on a personal level? Would this really make a difference?
Let me offer some breaking news to you. It's all personal. Okay, everything is personal in this world, and if a government representative wants to get good coverage or good perception of his mission, he should establish good relationship with the journalists involved. This is a key issue to go further. Unfortunately, the world we live in at the moment, especially the media world, is bi-dimensional. There are good and there are bad. There's no in-between. It is either black or white. There's no gray varieties in between. And at the moment, we, the Israelis, are perceived as the bad guys in this game the world is following. The essence of people like Marcus here and all the others who are dealing with public diplomacy is to change this image. It's not easy, I know. I meet with people. They do, as I said, they do not perceive me as an official representative of the state of Israel. Luckily for me, this is not my job. But I get the resentment, I sense the resentment, and it seems that we, the Israelis, are losing the narrative at the moment. We are not the good guys in this game anymore. We are the bad guys. And we can't explain to them, David, that Israel was, there was no Palestine before and there was a British mandate. We don't have time for it. We don't have the soundbite for it. We have to change the image now, based on the present, not based on any past perceptions.
Yeah, David, you talk about this second battlefield of media image that we seem to be losing.
Yeah, well, look, first of all, you can't give a history lesson in every 30-second broadcast, and yet you have to, and you can, if you reach out effectively, if you have an effective message, you can enable people to understand that context, and it will colour everything that they do, and that's not happening. And the question from Joy is really interesting, because I can imagine this lady in London saying, you know, how do we respond in real time? She's sitting there right now. Elvis Costello just cancelled his concerts in Israel, right? Why did Elvis Costello cancel his concerts in Israel? I would argue because he doesn't understand Israel. Not because he's a bad person, not because he's an evil person, not because he was seeking to make a political act and stab us in the back, because he genuinely doesn't understand what's going on here. He said in his explanation, he spoke about Israel visiting indignity and humiliation on the Palestinians. He spoke about he couldn't play here because it would require him to look the other way. The last thing that Israel would have wanted Elvis Costello to do would have been to look the other way. We believe, and I strongly believe, that the more you understand and have first-hand experience of Israel's reality, the better it is for Israel. We needed Elvis Costello to come here open-minded, to go touring around Israel, to go visit Gaza, to go to the West Bank, to speak to Israelis, to speak to Palestinians. And he, I think, drew an erroneous conclusion that we were the terrible people and therefore he couldn't play here without having got any of that impact, any of that input. And
unfortunately, our politicians give that image at the moment.
Well, some of them do.
The sound bites they offer.
Some of them do, and some of them don't. Right? Some of them do. Some of them are sounding moderate, and some of them are sounding hawkish. But for example, if Elvis Costello thinks we're doing terrible things to the people in Gaza, that makes me suspect that he doesn't know that 5 years ago Israel pulled out of Gaza. That there's not a single Jew in the Gaza Strip except for Gilad Shalit. That we pulled back to the international border. That there would be tranquility.